Hello and welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out here to the east of Avdiivka, where we recently saw some advancements by the Russians as they're pushing through the fortifications the Ukrainians have in the forest areas here to the east of Avdiivka. And after pushing here in this direction for the past couple of days, the Russians have managed to make this advancement, which I reported on earlier, and it has now received this geolocated footage confirming this Russian advance. And with this, we see that there is continuous efforts by the Russians to push in the direction of the Serpets River villages and take control of the eastern bank of the river. We then move on to the Avdiivka front, where we have the majority of today's updates. We first have this geolocated footage to the west of Kamyanka, showing previous footage of Russian forces moving through this northern area. They are moving through, getting control of the area, after which they went storming the Dacha area and followed up with attacking and flanking the Ukrainian positions here to the northwest of the area. So it seems that the Russians kept delaying the attacking of central parts to avoid the Ukrainian fortifications and going around by storming through the Dacha area. Something very interesting with the recent fighting in Avdiivka is that there is still some civilians left in the city despite the heavy bombardments and shelling over the past 2 years since the Russian invasion began. And with all of this, we see that there are numerous Ukrainian civilians who are going with the Russian soldiers who have managed to get a foothold within the city and evacuating from it. So with this, we see that there is likely a lot of civilians within Avdiivka, which is giving the Russian soldiers information on Ukrainian positions of their soldiers, equipment, and so on, as well as possibly the pipeline and other things that the Russians have used to go beyond the Ukrainian fortifications and hitting the Ukrainian weak points is likely from information from the local population of Avdiivka who are on the Russian side. Something similar could have happened in the northern Dacha area, since there was a sudden push by the Russians that managed them to get a foothold within the residential area. This could easily have been done with help from the local population. We then move on to the northern parts of the city, where in the residential area, the Russians have made several small advancements within the residential area, solidifying their control and foothold in the northern parts of the city. And a lot of heavy fighting is taking place by the railways, as Russians are trying to gain control over everything pretty much to the east of the railways and pushing through, getting a foothold across. Most of the fighting is concentrated around the bridge between the residential area and the coke plant to the west of the railway. So all of this is heavy fighting taking place in northern parts of the city, centered around the railways, where the Russians are making small advancements in a southern direction. All of this is taking place due to the Ukrainians relocating a lot of their forces to the south to continuously launch counterattacks, which have been reported further on here to the south of Avdiivka. We have this geolocated footage showing a Ukrainian Bradley moving through the southern parts before getting hit by a mine. After that, the Russian drone drops grenades inside the Bradley, disabling the vehicle. So the vehicle simply gets disabled by the mine, being unable to move, and the drone then drops to destroy the vehicle. There is video footage showing that the Ukrainian soldiers survive, but this shows that the Russians have already mined the residential area. So instead of actually advancing further, they used the area as a diversion as the Ukrainians started launching counterattacks, and they launched their own offensive in the north. But since then, the Russians have restarted their offensive operations. They've launched an attack from Opitne in the northeastern direction, trying to flank the Ukrainian counterattack towards the military base in the south. So they're trying to flank the Ukrainian offensive. And there's also pushing towards the Dacha area here to the southwest of Avdiivka. So the Russians are trying to close this bulge that the Ukrainians are holding to launch their attacks into the military base. And in the military base, there's also additional footage showing Russians shelling Ukrainian positions within it. So the Ukrainians are still inside of it. So there is constant bombardment and fighting here to the south of Avdiivka, and the Ukrainians are trying to launch counterattacks to re-establish positions and recapture the territory. Instead, the Ukrainian attack was pushed back, and now there's new footage showing a Ukrainian soldier in the citadel area having a machine gun position in the southern outskirts, and they are shooting in a eastern direction, where according to this footage right here in geolocation, the likely location of the Russian soldiers is here to the north of the residential area that they held under their control. So likely we're seeing Russian infantry assaults in this direction after they managed to push back and deny all of the Ukrainian counterattacks to recapture territory. They are instead pushing now in a northern direction, trying to advance further. So there's constant attempts by the Russians, not just in the south and in the north, but also to the east, to continuously push towards the Ukrainian positions and gain advancements and advantages throughout the front line by advancing in the different positions. So there's this constant fighting and 3 new confirmed advancements by the Russians here in the direction of Avdiivka, and there's constant fighting everywhere. According to some reports, the Russians are trying to launch some sort of Mariupol operation here in Avdiivka. They're trying to avoid the coke plant completely by going through the residential area, trying to close it from multiple directions, not just the north, but also the northeast, directly from the east, from the southeast, and in the southern direction, to attack from all sides and push them onto the citadel area before attacking the citadel area from all directions. Besides that, there's going to be a lot more fighting centered around the coke plant, where the Russians are planning on letting the Ukrainians concentrate their forces in the coke plant area before they want to storm it, and possibly even focus on the flanks to try and restart operations there, cutting off the coke plant and forcing the Ukrainian soldiers down inside of it and sieging it like they did in Mariupol here at the start of the Russian invasion in 2022. So all in all, for the Avdiivka direction, we can see it exactly as it is right here. There's constant attacks from all directions towards the Ukrainian positions. They have countered the Ukrainian counterattacks. They've managed to pass through it and overcome it. And now there's constant advancements by the Russians in every direction, where they are storming all of the Ukrainian positions all throughout the Avdiivka direction. According to Syriac maps, the Russians already hold 20% of Avdiivka, and there's constant fighting taking place everywhere throughout the city. And with this, we see that there is a final push taking place by the Russians, where they are simply storming the city from all parts, where they're trying to gain full control over it. And that is this current situation in Avdiivka. We then move on to the Pervomaiske direction, where there's also been an advancement here by the Russians, where they managed to capture this area between the 2 residential parts. And with this, the Russians have moved on to the next stage of the fighting in Pervomaiske, where the fighting will now take place in this shorter and thinner residential area, where the Russians can attack from multiple directions before moving on to the central part and final part of Pervomaiske in the northwest. So there is this effort by the Russians to push through, and they've managed to advance with this recent advancement here within the town. As for the south of that, there is some shelling of Ukrainian positions here by Nevelske, which has been geolocated. So I'm adding this here as well, showing that there is constant efforts by the Russians to not just advance within the town, but also to prevent any flanking attacks by the Ukrainians for the positional fighting around Nevelske. Further south in the direction of Novomikhailivka, there is reports of fighting taking place here, and there is this geolocated footage which shows there was an armored assault by the Russians towards the northeastern parts of the town. So we're seeing that there is constant efforts by the Russians, not just in Pervomaiske and Avdiivka, but also here in Novomikhailivka, and as we saw in the east of the Serebets River in the Luhansk, Donetsk, Kharkiv border. So we're seeing that there is constant efforts by the Russians and constant assaults by the Russians all throughout the front line as they try to make the most of the winter before it finishes. We are on the 6th of February and we're getting closer and closer to the end of winter, and the Russians haven't really taken any major parts yet. There's been some smaller villages taken by the Russians, but most importantly, the fighting around Avdiivka, Novomikhailivka, and the Kreminna front have all significantly intensified, and there's been significant developments in all of those 3 areas. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.